People think money problems come from bad investments. They don't. They come from bad psychology. Markets go up and down. That's their nature. But people, they go insane. That's their nature. Most investors lose not because they pick the wrong stock, but because they can't control their emotions long enough to let the right one work. They buy when it feels good and sell when it feels bad. In other words, they buy high and sell low and call it strategy. The truth is, the biggest threat to your wealth is not inflation, taxation, or recessions. It's you, your ego, your envy, your impatience. The market can't destroy you unless you first destroy yourself from the inside. When I was young, I thought intelligence would save me. It didn't. The graveyards of finance are filled with smart people who lost their tempers, their discipline, and eventually their shirts. The smarter they were, the dumber their behavior got, because they believed they could outthink the crowd. The market has a special way of humiliating people who think they're clever. What works isn't brilliance. It's temperament, staying calm when others panic, and rational when others chase the next miracle. Most people don't realize it, but investing is a psychological endurance test disguised as a math problem. You win not by predicting the next move, but by surviving your own impulses long enough to benefit from compound interest. And yet, survival is exactly what most people fail at. They can't stand boredom. They can't resist excitement. They mistake activity for progress and end up broke with stories instead of returns. You show me a man who can sit quietly while his neighbor gets rich, and I'll show you a man who will stay rich for life. Because money doesn't reward intelligence, it rewards emotional stability. The late Benjamin Graham said the market is a voting machine in the short run and a weighing machine in the long run. Most people never live long enough in their portfolio to see that weighing. They panic and jump off the scale the moment it tilts. You can't fix that with an MBA or a spreadsheet. That's a character problem, not an IQ problem. And character doesn't compound like capital. It's built the hard way by enduring discomfort without doing something stupid. So when people ask me for the secret to investing, I tell them something they never like hearing. The secret is learning to not react. Not to noise, not to fads, not to envy. Everyone wants to act. Few have the discipline to sit, and fewer still can sit without resentment while others get richer first. That's why the psychology of money isn't about finance, it's about human nature. And human nature doesn't change, no matter how many books or podcasts you consume. Greed, fear, envy, those are ancient forces. You can't erase them. You can only outsmart them. So here's the first rule of money. Don't trust yourself too much. When you think you're being rational, check again. You're probably being emotional with better vocabulary. If you can understand that, you've already beaten 90% of investors, because the rest are still trying to win a psychological war with a calculator. If you want to understand why people go broke, don't study economics, study psychology. Humans evolved to survive the jungle, not the stock market. Our brains are built for instant reaction, not long-term patience. Back in the caves, if you saw a tiger, you ran. If you found food, you ate. That wiring kept you alive. Now it makes you buy high and sell low. Fear and greed, the two oldest forces in the world, still drive 99% of financial behavior. It's not that people don't know what to do. They just can't do it. I've watched investors sit on a gold mine and still find a way to panic themselves out of it. The stock drops 10% and they act like it's the end of civilization. Meanwhile, the patient man quietly gets rich doing nothing. I once said the first rule of compounding is to never interrupt it unnecessarily. But that's exactly what people do. They interrupt their own success because boredom feels unbearable. They can't leave well enough alone. Envy makes it worse. Your neighbor makes money faster, and suddenly your own plan feels stupid. So you copy him right before his luck runs out. Envy is the one emotion that doesn't even give you pleasure. It just eats you from the inside while you pretend to be rational. It's a guaranteed way to destroy both your peace and your portfolio. Warren and I watched this happen 1,000 times. A man buys a great business, then sells it because someone else doubled their money faster. He trades a lifetime of wealth for a moment of superiority. That's not investing. That's monkey behavior dressed in a suit. You can't reason with envy. It's not logical, it's biological. That's why I call it the monkey in the mirror. No matter how old or educated you get, it's still there, grinning back, daring you to act stupid. Most people lose money not because they're unlucky, but because they can't tell when they're being driven by that monkey. They think they're making bold moves. In reality, they're gambling with their future because someone else looks richer today. The irony is the market eventually punishes both fear and greed, just at different times. When you're greedy, prices are high, and when you're fearful, prices are low. So most investors spend their lives doing the wrong thing at the wrong time for the wrong reasons. The smart investor understands this cycle and refuses to play the game. He accepts volatility as the price of admission and boredom as the cost of wealth. That's not easy, but it's simple. The trick is to stay sane when everyone else loses their mind. That requires emotional distance, the ability to look at your own reactions and say, that's the monkey again. Halt. I once heard someone say, the market is a device for transferring money from the impatient to the patient. That's not just clever, it's painfully accurate. If you can resist greed when everyone is euphoric and resist fear when everyone is terrified, you'll win a game most people don't even know they're playing. But of course, most people can't, because it's not fun to look stupid in the short term, even if it makes you rich in the long term. In the end, successful investing isn't about brilliance. It's about mastering the primitive animal inside you. That's the hardest work there is, because the animal never leaves. It just gets quieter when you learn to stop feeding it. So next time you feel the urge to act, don't ask, what's the market doing? Ask, what's my brain doing? Because that, not the S&P 500, is what decides your fate. People overestimate intelligence in investing. They think success comes from being smart. It doesn't. If it did, every PhD would be a billionaire. Wall Street is full of high IQ people who can price an option in their sleep, but can't sit still for 6 months without touching their portfolio. They know everything except how to behave. I've said it before. A lot of brilliant people are absolutely hopeless at making money. They can recite economic theories, but they can't resist the urge to act when they should be sitting on their hands. The problem isn't lack of information. It's the illusion of control. The smarter you are, the harder it is to accept that you can't outsmart randomness. You think you can predict it, manage it, dominate it, until it humbles you. Markets have a way of teaching humility. They don't care about your IQ, your credentials, or how clever your Excel model looks. They only care about your behavior when things get ugly. I remember a period during the 1970s. Inflation was running wild. People thought America was finished, and every expert had a new theory to explain it. Most of them went broke, not because they were wrong, but because they couldn't admit they didn't know. Warren and I made plenty of mistakes too, but we never pretended to understand more than we did. We stayed within our circle of competence and ignored the noise. That's what intelligence really means in investing, knowing where your intelligence stops. If you need a formula for success, it's this. Temperament is greater than IQ, always, because discipline doesn't panic when the market does. Intelligence without humility leads to arrogance, and arrogance is just ignorance in fancy clothing. I've seen fund managers who are mathematical geniuses, yet blew up their funds in a single year. Why? They were too smart to follow simple rules. They thought, this time it's different. It never is. The market punishes people who believe they're special, and it rewards those who accept they're not. There's a reason Warren says we don't look for 7-foot geniuses to invest with. We look for people with ordinary intelligence and uncommon discipline. That's because discipline scales. Intelligence doesn't. The truth is, money flows towards sanity, toward people who can think clearly when everyone else is emotional. That doesn't require brilliance, just control. And control is boring. That's why it's rare. If you want excitement, go to Vegas. If you want wealth, learn to be dull. Boring compounds. Exit my evaporat. People don't want to hear that because it sounds unheroic. They'd rather believe there's some secret formula or system. There isn't. There's just patience in the absence of stupidity. And the absence of stupidity, unfortunately, looks a lot like nothing is happening. That's why few people practice it. The world doesn't reward brilliance, it rewards endurance. If you can survive your own emotions long enough, the math will take care of the rest. So if you're young and you think you're smarter than the market, here's a piece of advice from an old man. You're not. The sooner you accept that, the richer you'll become. If you ever want to lose faith in human intelligence, just watch a financial mania unfold. Every few years, we dress up the same stupidity in new language. Call it tulips, railroads, dot-coms, crypto. The costumes change, but the insanity doesn't. You'd think people would learn after a few centuries. They don't, because greed has a short memory and a loud voice. In the late 1990s, everyone thought they'd found the secret to infinite wealth. No profits? No problem. The internet was going to change everything. It did mostly by reminding people that arithmetic still matters. Then 2008 came along. Same movie, different actors. This time, the delusion was that housing prices could only go up. When reality returned, it didn't knock, it kicked the door down. The crowd always believes it's smarter than history, and history always proves it's not. What fascinates me isn't the bubbles themselves, it's the psychology underneath them. Each generation believes it's immune to the madness of the last. Then they fall for the same trick wearing a shinier suit. People join crowds for comfort, not truth. When everyone's getting rich, being skeptical feels lonely, and people fear loneliness more than poverty. That's the real reason manias spread. Social proof. No one wants to be the only sober man at a drunken party. It's easier to stay quiet and dance until the floor collapses. Warren and I learned long ago, you can't make money agreeing with the crowd. You make money by being right when the crowd is wrong and waiting long enough for them to notice. But that waiting is the hard part. The crowd looks smart for a long time before it looks stupid. Patience is what separates the rich from the ruined. The lesson is simple, though never easy. If you need reassurance from others, you're already finished. Because the moment your opinion depends on the approval of the herd, you've handed them control over your fate. In markets, independence is a survival skill. You have to think for yourself and endure being misunderstood for a while. Every great investor I've ever met had one thing in common. They were willing to look wrong before they looked right. That's not courage, that's sanity in disguise. The crowd will always find a new reason to justify excess. They'll say, this time is different, or the old rules don't apply. Whenever you hear those words, start tightening your seatbelt. I've lived through enough cycles to know when everyone agrees, it's usually the end of the party. People don't get destroyed by volatility. They get destroyed by conformity. They want certainty in a world that doesn't offer any, so they follow the loudest voice until it leads them off a cliff. And the sad part, even after the crash, they'll tell themselves they couldn't have seen it coming. But they could. They just didn't want to look uncool by standing still while others ran. So if you ever feel the urge to chase what everyone else is chasing, do yourself a favor. Go for a walk instead. By the time you get back, you'll find the madness already starting to fade. In the long run, crowds make you comfortable. But comfort is the enemy of clear thinking. And in the markets, clear thinking is the only edge that lasts. One of the most dangerous delusions in money is the belief that you're in control. You're not. Not over markets, not over timing, and often not even over yourself. The human brain hates uncertainty, so it invents patterns where none exist and calls it analysis. We build models, charts, and narratives just to feel a little less helpless. But here's the truth. Most of what happens in markets is random noise, dressed up as meaning, and most of what people call skill is luck with a good PR agent. It's uncomfortable to admit that, so people pretend their forecasts matter. They don't. If you can't predict your own mood tomorrow morning, how can you predict global economics for the next decade? I once said that if you think you can predict the market, you're either a fool or a liar. And most of Wall Street is a clever combination of both. I've seen fund managers who'd rather be wrong with a crowd than right alone. They run computer models with 6 decimal places, but can't make one good decision when fear sets in. You can't spreadsheet human emotion. You can only understand it and prepare for it. That's why our approach was built on simplicity. Find a good business, buy it at a reasonable price, and hold it while everyone else loses their nerve. That's not glamorous, but it works because it avoids the illusion of control. The market is going to do whatever it wants. Your job is not to predict, it's to endure. And that's a psychological skill, not an analytical one. When I look back at all the times I could have acted smarter, I realized that doing nothing was almost always the better choice. The fewer decisions you make, the fewer mistakes you make. And in investing, avoiding stupidity is a far better strategy than chasing brilliance. But people hate hearing that. They want action, not restraint. They want to feel in control, even if that control is an illusion. So they trade constantly. They chase signals. They read the news as if it contains divine wisdom. It doesn't. Most of what's written about markets exists to fill space between advertisements. The world doesn't reward movement. It rewards correct behavior sustained over time. And behavior is another word for psychology. If you can't sit still, you'll pay for that restlessness, usually in dollars, sometimes in dignity. When Warren and I buy something, we don't stare at tickers all day. We read, we think, we wait. That's how you turn time into money. But that kind of patience feels unbearable to most people. They'd rather pretend they can control outcomes than admit they can only control themselves. Here's the thought experiment. If the market shut down for 5 years, would you still be comfortable holding what you own? If the answer is no, you don't own an investment, you own a distraction. The illusion of control is seductive because it flatters the ego, but ego is what ruins investors. It whispers that you're smarter, faster, different. Then it hands you the rope to hang yourself with. You don't beat markets by predicting them. You survive them by adapting to your own psychology, by staying calm when chaos hits, and refusing to play games you don't understand. That's not luck. That's wisdom, earned the hard way by being wrong enough times to stop pretending you're in charge. Everyone wants to be rich. No one wants to suffer for it. That's why so few people stay wealthy. They can't handle the emotional cost. The truth about money is simple. Getting rich is hard, but staying rich is harder because wealth demands a level of discipline most people only have during poverty. When you're broke, you're forced to be cautious. When you're rich, you start believing you're bulletproof. That's when nature hands you the invoice. I've watched it happen over and over. People win, then forget how they won. They start chasing new thrills, new deals, new toys. They mistake motion for progress. They forget that compounding only works if you don't interrupt it. Every fortune eventually meets its test, not from the market, but from the owner's psychology. When you have more money than you need, the real challenge becomes not losing your sense. And make no mistake, markets will test you. They'll shake your faith, mock your patience, and seduce you with shortcuts that look clever but rot your discipline. Most people can't stand watching their net worth fall by 30%. But that's the entry fee for long-term wealth. You don't get rich without volatility. You just decide whether you'll pay for it with discomfort or stupidity. Discomfort is temporary. Stupidity is permanent. The problem is that people confuse temporary pain with permanent loss. They sell great businesses because the stock fell. That's like divorcing your spouse because they caught a cold. Pain is part of the process. It's the market's way of checking who actually deserves the reward. I remember in the 1970s when inflation and pessimism ruled the world. Stocks were cheap because no one wanted them. We bought when others despaired, not because we enjoyed suffering, but because we trusted arithmetic more than emotion. Then, years later, everyone called it brilliant timing. It wasn't timing. It was tolerance for pain. The capacity to endure discomfort is what separates the investor from the speculator. The speculator wants dopamine. The investor wants peace. And peace doesn't come from predicting the future. It comes from accepting that you can't and surviving anyway. There's a reason Warren and I hold businesses we understand deeply. We'd rather suffer through temporary declines than panic out of ignorance. Because ignorance in investing is the most expensive pain of all. The irony is that pain, properly endured, is a compounding force of its own. Each market fall you survive makes you stronger and calmer for the next one. But if you run at the first sign of discomfort, you'll never stay in the game long enough to win. That's why I often say the world isn't destroyed by volatility. It's destroyed by people who can't handle it. If you can't emotionally tolerate seeing your portfolio drop 50% without changing your plan, you don't deserve the long-term return of equities. Simple as that. So when people ask how to become rich, I tell them, learn to be comfortable being uncomfortable. Learn to sit still while the world screams. Learn to ignore the noise, the envy, the fear. That's the real tuition for wealth. And it's far more valuable than any MBA because in the end, the market rewards not the smartest, not the fastest, but the one who can suffer wisely and stay standing when everyone else has run for cover. Passions sound boring, and that's exactly why it works. The market is designed to transfer wealth from the active to the patient, and the patient are always in short supply. Everyone wants compounding, but no one wants to wait for it. They love the idea of time doing the heavy lifting until they realize time moves slowly. In an age where people measure attention in seconds, waiting years feels like punishment. But wealth doesn't grow on your schedule. It grows on the market's schedule, and the market doesn't care how bored you are. I've often said the big money is not in the buying or the selling, but in the waiting. That's the sentence most people hear, but few truly understand. Waiting doesn't mean doing nothing. It means resisting stupidity while time compounds your sanity. You sit on good businesses, You ignore noise, and you let arithmetic perform its quiet miracle. Most investors don't lose money because of bad ideas. They lose because they couldn't wait long enough for good ones to work. It's like planting a tree and then digging it up every few weeks to check if it's growing. That's not investing. That's financial gardening with a shovel in each hand. Patience requires faith, not in the market, but in your own process. You have to believe in arithmetic more than emotion, in time more than timing. Warren and I once waited over 20 years for some investments to deliver full value. Imagine trying to explain that to a generation that gets angry when their Amazon package is late by a day. That's the real psychological challenge, learning to be at peace with slowness. You can't rush compounding anymore. Then you can rush the seasons. You can only avoid interrupting it, and that requires emotional strength, because during those years of waiting, the world will tempt you to move. There'll be bubbles, crashes, new paradigms, and experts shouting predictions like preachers at a carnival. The patient investor learns to smile politely and do nothing, because action is often the enemy of outcome. When you finally understand that, patience stops feeling like a burden and starts feeling like a weapon. It gives you an advantage others can't replicate because they don't even know it's an advantage. In markets, most people think speed creates wealth. It doesn't. Stillness does. Stillness allows compounding to do its quiet work, while the impatient burn their capital chasing shortcuts. If you want an easy filter for future success, ask yourself this: can I wait a decade without losing faith? If the answer is no, then the market will eventually take your money and give it to someone who said yes. Patience, properly understood, isn't laziness. It's strategic inactivity. It's the discipline of letting time do what your impulses can't. So yes, patience is boring, but boredom is underrated. It's the quiet space where wealth grows and where fools lose interest. The secret is simple. If you can learn to enjoy the wait, you'll eventually own everything the impatient once desired. If you really want to make yourself miserable, don't smoke, drink, or gamble. Just start comparing. Envy is the deadliest sin in investing, not because it kills your portfolio quickly, but because it eats your peace slowly. It's also the most pointless sin because there's no fun in it. At least gluttony tastes good, and greed feels exciting for a while. Envy just burns your insides while you smile in public. I've seen men with $100 million feel poor because someone else made 200. That's not poverty, that's pathology. The world constantly throws envy in your face. Your neighbor buys a new car. Your colleague doubles his income. Some idiot online claims to have made 10,000% on a coin with a dog's face. And suddenly, your sensible life feels like failure. That's the psychology of money at its worst. It tricks you into measuring yourself by other people's scoreboard. And once you do that, you've already lost. You stop asking, what's enough for me? And start asking, why not me? That's when greed disguises itself as ambition, and common sense goes out the window. I've never seen anyone go broke for underestimating envy. It's everywhere in boardrooms, in neighborhoods, in marriages. It's the invisible tax on happiness. Envy leads to dumb behavior because it distorts perception. You stop thinking in absolute terms and start thinking in relative ones. You don't care about earning 10%. You care that your friend earned 12. The problem is you can never win that game. There's always someone richer, luckier, louder. If envy were a contest, the prize would be endless frustration. I learned early that life gets easier when you admire instead of envy. Admiration is fuel. It pushes you to learn, to grow, to stay rational. Envy just corrodes your ability to think. When Warren and I built Berkshire, we weren't trying to be richer than anyone. We were trying to be wiser than our past selves. That's a much saner competition because it's the only one you can actually win. You'll never master money until you master comparison. The world wants you to believe wealth is a race, but it's not. It's a quiet game between your patience and your impulses. And envy is the impulse that breaks the silence. It whispers, do something, lay. So you chase fads, you take risks you don't understand, and you end up exactly where you started, only angrier. The cure is simple but not easy. Learn to be content, not complacent content. Know what enough looks like, and have the courage to stop running once you reach it. If you don't, you'll spend your life climbing ladders, leaning against the wrong walls, and by the time you realize it, you'll be too tired to climb back down. Envy is the one emotion that guarantees you'll never enjoy success, no matter how much you have. So if you want peace of mind with your money, start by killing envy, and do it quickly before it kills your judgment, your joy, and your sanity. Because in the end, it's better to be reasonably rich and content than spectacularly rich and perpetually miserable. People love to complicate simple things. It makes them feel intelligent. But in money, as in life, complexity is usually a disguise for confusion. The truth is, wealth has always come from the same few principles. Spend less than you earn, invest what's left, and don't interrupt the compounding. That's it. But try telling that to someone looking for excitement. Most investors can't stand simplicity because it feels too plain to be profound. They want algorithms, indicators, and secret insights. They want the illusion of sophistication. But markets don't reward sophistication. They reward discipline. When I was young, I made the same mistake. I thought intelligence meant having complex opinions. It took me decades to learn that the older and wiser you get, the simpler your worldview becomes. The irony is that everyone says they want to think like Buffett and Munger, but they skip the part where we do almost nothing most of the time. We don't chase, we don't predict, and we don't confuse activity with achievement. We prefer obvious ideas executed patiently over brilliant theories executed poorly. Here's a little secret. The world's best investors spend more time reading and thinking than buying and selling. That's because they understand something the rest don't. Decisions compound the same way money does. Make fewer but better decisions, and you win by subtraction, not addition. The average investor does the opposite. They collect data like hoarders, mistake complexity for control, and drown in information while starving for wisdom. It's tragic because the best financial system in history rewards the exact behaviors that feel least exciting. The path to wealth looks like this: earn consistently, save consistently, invest rationally, wait endlessly. That's it. But that formula doesn't sell newsletters. So instead, the world promotes noise. 5 stocks to buy now. Next big tech revolution. And secrets the billionaires don't want you to know. The real secret is that there is no secret. Just habits most people are too impatient to practice. If you understand this, you stop treating the market like a puzzle and start treating it like a partnership between your capital and your character. Because in the end, your returns follow your behavior, not your brilliance. And good behavior looks a lot like boredom. That's why simplicity is so powerful. It removes ego from the equation. It forces you to focus on what matters: time, discipline, and arithmetic. Simplicity is the highest form of sophistication because it requires the most understanding to embrace. It means knowing exactly what to ignore And if you think that sounds too easy, ask yourself why so few people are wealthy. Most don't fail because they're stupid. They fail because they can't resist making something simple, more complicated than it needs to be. So remember this. If your investment philosophy fits on a napkin, you're probably on the right track. If it requires a 30-slide presentation, you're probably selling something to yourself. In the end, money doesn't change you. It just shows you who you already were in high definition. If you were disciplined, money amplifies your discipline. If you were reckless, money gives your recklessness a larger stage. That's the uncomfortable truth people avoid. The psychology of money isn't about money. It's about character. You can't buy rationality. You can't outsource judgment. And you can't rent wisdom. You either earn them through pain and patience, or you stay a permanent student in the school of hard knocks. I've lived long enough to see all types. The brilliant fools, the humble winners, the envious losers, and the lucky idiots. They all made or lost money for the same reason. Their temperament. Markets will always test you. They'll tempt you when you should be cautious and scare you when you should be calm. If you don't know who you are before the storm, you'll find out the hard way when it hits. That's why I keep saying your behavior matters more than your brain, because behavior is the bridge between knowledge and results. And most people burn that bridge with emotion. The wise investor accepts that imperfection is permanent. You'll never eliminate fear or greed. You just learn to observe them without obeying them. That's what maturity looks like in finance. Not certainty, but composure. If you can stay rational when the world loses its mind, you'll eventually own a big piece of that world. The irony of money is that once you understand it deeply, you stop being obsessed with it. You realize that the purpose of wealth is freedom, not display, security, not status. I've never envied the man with the bigger yacht. I've envied the man who sleeps soundly. Peace of mind is the ultimate dividend, and it's paid only to those who stop confusing appearance with substance. So here's how the psychology of money really works. You learn over time to detach your self-worth from your net worth. You stop reacting to noise. You start thinking independently, and you make peace with the idea that getting rich slowly is still the fastest way that actually works. It sounds simple, but it's the hardest thing in the world because it requires you to win a war, not against the market, but against yourself. And that's the one war most people never even realize they're fighting. So if you take one lesson from a long life of watching fortunes made and lost, let it be this. The market isn't your enemy. The economy isn't your enemy. Your neighbor's success isn't your enemy. Your own psychology is. Control it, and you'll never need luck again.